Welcome to the Unheroic Side of Leadership, a chapter written by Jerome T. Murphy. Jerome Murphy is the Howard Howe Professor of Education Emeritus and Dean Emeritus at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. He has 2 degrees from Columbia University, a BA from Columbia College, and an MA from Teachers College, and an EDD from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Jerome's current teaching and research focuses on the well-being of education leaders and how to find purpose and the ability to thrive in the midst of stress and heavy workloads. So sit back and relax as this presentation by Shannon Foster and Ken Cope guides you through some of the nuances of leadership and the 6 dimensions of unheroic leadership. Now I'm going to send it over to Ken, and he will start our discussion with the reality of leadership.
A large section of our society today embraces not only immediate gratification, but also exaggerates the importance of celebrity and power. Millions of people around the world revere actors, musicians, athletes, and reality stars. The artificial recognition of heroism that regularly gets bestowed upon these individuals by their followers often distorts the actual representation and hard work that goes into effective leadership. To be clear, leadership has nothing at all to do with popularity. Leadership is not glamorous in any way. Leaders are not omnipotent or all knowing. Leaders are people, everyday people, that can make a difference in the lives of those around them that share in the desire or pursuit of a common goal. Some of the most important leaders in our lives are those closest to us that can demonstrate their commitment to our progress and well being every day. Their subtle kindness and eagerness to listen and render support do not lessen their capacity as a strong leader. Instead, these characteristics and behaviors represent the essence of effective leadership that influences us on a humanistic level to persevere and strive for continuous improvement. The lion takes many lessons from the lamb. Strong leaders embrace getting into the fray and mixing it up with the alligators that surround the team and do not sit atop an ivory tower commanding from afar. Shannon will now discuss the lion's perspective of leadership.
According to the Lion's perspective of leadership, today's educational leader is expected to be a heroic boss who meets at least 6 expectations, which you will see listed here on the slide. First, they have possession of a clear personal vision. They are extremely knowledgeable and possess the answers to the most pressing of problems. They are strong. They display initiative, courage, and tenacity. They communicate forcefully, using knowledge to convey their vision aggressively and persuasively. They amass power and use it for organizational improvement. And finally, they are take-charge individuals who solve knotty problems along the way as they move toward achieving their personal visions. In Chapter 3, Robert Reich provides a scathing review of today's portrayal of leaders, and he uses words like buck the system, take no crap. He says that they are outspoken, believe in hands-on management. They are oftentimes confrontational, and they motivate through force. However, this lion's approach to leadership is definitely flawed. These leaders miss the behind-the-scenes aspects of day-to-day leadership. They pontificate on the big strategy, and they miss the niggling problems. They also set unrealistic standards for measuring administrative success. The perspective of leaders as all-knowing also undermines the conscientious leaders who think they should live up to those expectations. For example, how do you respond as a leader when you don't have all the answers to the hard problems or questions, especially if you're reporting upwards to someone within this style? Today's business problems are so complex that you have to solicit and incorporate the perspective of multiple individuals and leaders with vision. The lion approach ignores the individual leadership of lower-level staff members and makes it less likely that people will step forward to serve as leaders when you need them.
In Chapter 3, Murphy provides a framework of 6 dimensions that frame the unheroic side of leadership. First, we must develop a shared vision. Leaders are not all knowing, and successful leadership is a team sport. Next, we must ask questions. Knowledge is one of the most critical elements thriving leaders rely on when making decisions. Leaders cope with weaknesses. As much as we all want to excel in all aspects of everything we do, it's just not possible. Therefore, we must accept our shortcomings and modify our approaches to mitigate their influence on our results. A good rule of thumb provided by Murphy in this chapter is if you don't listen to others, they won't listen to you. Listening and acknowledging the feedback is imperative. Even when not obligated to do so, leaders should lean on others for active leadership because by distributing the authority and asking for assistance, leaders can tap into undeveloped talent resident in the organization. Finally, it's okay to say uncle. Leaders must lean heavily on those around them to help bear some of the burden associated with the job. The swamp is deep and full of alligators, so it takes a team to keep it safe and clean. Let's use the next few slides to discuss these concepts a bit further. Shannon will now discuss the development of a shared vision.
The first dimension of the unheroic side of leadership is developing a shared vision. Many observers today believe that vision is established top-down. The boss articulates the message, and then it is installed by the staff. Leaders lead and followers follow. However, research over the past few decades validates that the top-down approach to establishing a vision within an organization seldom describes reality because goals change, and organizations must stay fluid and dynamic to meet the needs of our complex global society. In fact, purposes and policies are often discovered through an evolutionary process. And I think that's a great word to describe developing a shared vision, that it is an evolutionary process. When we look at top leaders from innovative companies like Apple, Google, or Amazon, we see that they tend to point out a general direction rather than providing a specific destination. And you'll see here a quote from Ronald Heifetz: "A leader becomes a guide, interpreter, and stimulus of engagement." These leaders are more likely to provide a scaffolding for collaboration than a blueprint for action. So with this first dimension, it suggests that visions are more often discovered, and leaders are more likely to experience success in developing a shared vision if they act as catalysts.
Seek out good knowledge. Spend time asking good questions. Administrators naturally bring knowledge to their jobs. However, effective leaders in these positions are continually asking questions in an attempt to solicit local knowledge. What does the organizational culture really look like at different levels? The key people, rituals, assumptions, artifacts, etc. Also, attempting to solicit situational knowledge, the who, what, where, when, why, and how of any given issue. The people knowledge. How do they feel? What do they think, need, want, perceptions? And not just questions out of curiosity, but questions that will bring someone to a solution which they may have already have, but you need to draw out of them. This type of knowledge is usually not stored in any database. It's often highly emotional and only captured through soliciting the perspectives and underlying feelings of key stakeholders. Administrators must accept that they are not all knowing and create an informal system to continually collect information, meetings, phone calls, interviews, and discussion. It's also important to know when to stop. Too much knowledge can stall progress. There is such a thing as paralysis by analysis. Shannon will now discuss how leaders cope with weaknesses.
Moving on from asking questions, let's take a look at the fourth dimension of the unheroic side of leadership, which is coping with weakness. To deal with personal deficiencies in skills, knowledge, attributes, or disposition, Chapter 3 recommends 4 coping strategies that are seen as very useful. The first one here is matching talents and personalities. Some jobs require much more technical skills, while others require broad, strategic thinking. As one corporate leader said, you can't grow lemons in Antarctica. So the first thing you want to do is take a look at the situation and determine if your strengths or leadership style is a good match for what's being asked of you. Next is compensation. Successful leaders not only understand their shortcomings, they take the steps necessary to compensate for them. They often will hire the individuals who have the skills necessary to fill in the gaps and will challenge them. Take a look at your team and make sure that for each of your weaknesses, you have a team member with a corresponding strength. Third is candor. We have to treat subordinates as colleagues and acknowledge to close associates our weaknesses and our feelings about those weaknesses. Without candor, crucial intelligence will be withheld by your team, jeopardizing decision-making and implementation efforts. How can you expect your colleagues to be open and honest with you if you don't extend the same level of trust? Finally, we have acceptance. Psychologists state that one must recognize, acknowledge, and accept one's weaknesses and the feelings associated with those weaknesses before one can begin to move beyond them. The more a leader accepts personal weaknesses and feelings, the more effective he or she becomes. And this is not an easy task. A crucial lesson for new leaders is to practice some self-awareness. What is your inner talk? To determine the impact you have on yourself.
The heroic lion image of a leader creates the problem. When leaders believe they possess or should possess all of the necessary information and knowledge, they do not see listening to others as essential. You can't be a lion if you act like a lamb. Also, good listening fails when leaders make faulty assumptions about others. For example, assuming confrontations signify ill will rather than a misunderstanding, or that everybody shares their worldviews is detrimental to a leader. People are different, and that must be understood. Good listening involves an active effort to understand the world from another's perspective. It challenges us not only to establish an instant analysis of what was said, but also discover what was left unsaid, either through the accompanying tone or nonverbal body gestures. From a coaching perspective, Murphy describes level 2 and level 3 listening. Level 2 is focused listening. At level 2, all of your attention is directed at one person or group of people. You listen intently to every word and nuance in the conversation. Level 3 is global listening. At level 3, you're aware of the energy between you and the others. You're also aware of how that energy is changing. You detect sadness, lightness, shifts in attitude. There is a way you are conscious of underlying mood or tone or the impact of conversation, where it's taking you and the person or group of people with whom you are engaged. On an emotional level, listening is often the best thing an administrator or leader can do, and sometimes the only thing you can do. People are passionate about their work, and when they feel they're unheard, they get frustrated. The rule of thumb here is pretty simple. To be a lion, you must first be a lamb. Shannon will now discuss what it means to depend on others.
Here we have the fifth dimension in our discussion on heroic leadership, which is depending on others. Top administrators in educational organizations are surprisingly dependent on others to bring about change. And in the chapter, Murphy gives two examples. First, in the Army, the generals are highly dependent on the success of their lower-ranking staff carrying out the plan. And in a school environment, the dean is dependent on the successful leadership demonstrated by his administration and faculty. At the heart of depending on others is the idea of shared power and empowering your colleagues to take the lead when most appropriate. Consider your team members possess expertise and information that are crucial for defining problems and making progress that ultimately leads to success. By sharing power and asking for help, leaders can tap latent resources. That empowerment and autonomy creates a greater level of self-efficacy, responsibility, and intrinsic motivation in your team members. Murphy also defines the concept of norm of reciprocity, which is quite simply, if you share your power with others, they will, in turn, share their power with you. And let's recognize, followers have a lot of power. In addition to the strengths they bring to the table, without followers, there is no leader. Leaders can often achieve results by acting like followers and depending on followers to act like leaders. In a nutshell, the dimension of depending on others asks, how can you distribute leadership throughout your organization? Now, Ken will take us through the last dimension, which is letting go.
As we've mentioned earlier, it's okay for leaders to say uncle. In this chapter, Murphy humorously refers to the goose theory of leadership as the times when faculty and staff members go into the boss's office honking and hissing like geese. They ruffle their feathers, poop on the rug, and then leave. Then it becomes the boss's job to clean up the mess. Leaders cannot clean up every mess. That responsibility must be shared, and delegating authority to others to help clean up everyday problems that arise in an organization is imperative. Instead of jumping in to save the day and constantly putting yourself in the role of rescuer, consider taking on the role of a coach. How do you help your team develop the ability to solve problems on their own? This is an empowering process for everyone, but you must also be willing to take the heat if they fail in the process. If you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. In today's competitive environment, deciding to do some things badly, letting go before the time seems right, and coping with the consequences are all ingredients of leadership behavior. Shannon will now walk us through the summary of what we've learned thus far in this chapter.
Now that we've gone through the main points of Chapter 3, Ken and I would like to offer you a few exercises or practices that might help as you engage in the unheroic side of leadership. And you'll see each of these practices coincides with one of the dimensions that we discussed today. So first, as it relates to developing a shared vision, take a moment and look at your organization's vision and consider, how do I contribute to its evolution? Remember, visions are not meant to be stagnant, and they should grow and evolve over time. Second, in terms of asking questions, in your daily interactions, try asking open-ended questions, and it isn't as easy as it sounds. Or at the very least, start by becoming aware of the types of questions you tend to ask of those on your team. How do you seek local, situational, and/or people knowledge? And finally, in terms of coping with weakness, take 10 minutes and engage in self-awareness by considering the last time you felt you didn't have the skills needed for a particular project. In what ways can you use the coping skills that we discussed today of matching, compensation, candor, and/or acceptance when you find yourself in a similar situation in the future?
Practice makes perfect. Use level 2 and 3 listening with a friend or coworker, or by simply asking them to tell you about their recent holiday experience for 5 to 10 minutes. How did you feel afterwards? Be honest. This is not easy. Start with a simple acknowledgement of how many times you strayed from the conversation or lost interest. Ask your partner about how they feel after talking with you. How did they know whether you were engaged or not? Reflection. When are you most comfortable depending upon others? When are you the least comfortable? Reflection. When was the last time you stepped in to rescue someone? How might you have handled the situation differently so the person or group of people could have managed the situation on their own?
So that wraps up our presentation today. Ken and I hope you have enjoyed the time that we have spent together. And of course, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to either one of us.